Welcome to the video lesson on energy levels in ecosystems. In this video, we will be discussing the difference between producers and consumers and all the different types of consumers, food chains, food webs, and ecological pyramids. Let's start off with the definition for a producer. Producers provide energy-rich compounds that other organisms need to survive. Typical examples of producers include certain bacteria, algae, and plants. Producers are typically called autotrophs. Auto is a prefix that means self. Troph means food. So an autotroph is an organism that makes their own food. Most autotrophs make that own food by performing photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is a process in which sunlight is used to convert carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen. The carbohydrates is the food. Examples of producers include photosynthetic bacteria, bacteria that perform photosynthesis, algae, which, by the way, algae provide the most oxygen of any resource on our planet, and of course all the various plants. Note, they all use photosynthesis to produce food and energy. There are some rare organisms that use chemicals to produce food and energy, but there are very few of those. The opposite of a producer is a consumer. Consumers must rely on other organisms for its energy and food supply. Examples of consumers include most bacteria, animals, and fungi. Consumers are also called heterotrophs because they obtain food by consuming other organisms. Hetero means different, trophs means food, so heterotrophs obtain food by different other living things. Examples of consumers include herbivores that only eat plants to obtain food and energy. Examples of herbivores include the white-tailed deer pictured in this picture, rabbit, squirrel, turtle, the zebra, the cow, and this gorilla. Extra credit in class tomorrow if you tell me why this would be a poor shot for a hunter to take on that white-tailed deer doe. Another type of consumer are what are called carnivores. Carnivores only eat other animals to obtain food and energy. Often referred to as meat eaters, carnivores include wolves, sharks, the lion pictured here, cats, snakes, and Smudge, our pet dog. Another type of consumer are what are called omnivores. Omnivores eat both plants and animals to obtain food and energy. Examples of omnivores that eat both plants and animals are bears, possum, crows, most birds in fact, including the chicken and ostrich pictured here, the raccoon, pigs, fox, and you and I. Another type of consumer are what are known as scavengers. Scavengers eat already dead animals that have been killed by predators or died of other causes. Examples of scavengers are these vultures, the fly, hyenas, this ant, and this seagull. It should be noted that sometimes scavengers aren't just scavengers, that often they could be carnivores that will also feed on dead animals if given the opportunity to do so. The hyena is a great example of this. Hyenas do hunt in packs and will kill their own food, in which case they would be a carnivore in that instance. But they are also known to find dead things and eat those as well, and in that instance they would be labeled as a scavenger. So these organisms aren't necessarily just one or the other, though there are some that are just scavengers, like the vulture and the fly. Another type of consumer are what are known as decomposers. Decomposers chemically break down dead plant and animal remains. They produce what's called detritus. Detritus are small pieces of dead plant and animal remains. Examples of decomposers include the fungi, which are pictured here, bacteria, and these what look like termites here, and maggots eating this corpse pictured in the diagram you're looking at now. The last type of consumer that we're going to talk about here are what are called detritivores. Detritivores feed on detritus particles. As mentioned earlier, detritus is small pieces of dead plant and animal remains. Organisms that feed on this material include the earthworm shown here, the bugs eating this pile of cow poop, snails, millipedes, centipedes, and other types of insects, and crabs, shrimp, for example, are all detritivores. Next, we're going to take a look at food chains and food webs. Food chains show the series of steps that energy passes through in an ecosystem. A couple examples of food chains are shown here in the diagram. Let's look at the one on the left. We have a plant, which would be a producer, consumed by a grasshopper. The bird eats the grasshopper, the snake captures and eats the bird, and the owl captures and eats the snake. The plant would be a producer, the grasshopper would be a primary consumer, the bird would be a secondary consumer, and the snake and the owl would be tertiary consumers. Over here on the right, we have another example, more aquatic example. We have primary producers of aquatic plants that are eaten by herbivore type fish. These small fish are eaten by omnivorous fish, which eat each other, and are eventually eaten by the bear, which of course would be your carnivore. Food webs are a network of complex interactions formed by the feeding relationships among the various organisms in an ecosystem. In the one on the left, the food web pictured on the left here, we start off with plants, which of course would be your producers, and all the different animals and organisms that would eat plants, which are then eaten by other organisms. And by following any one of these arrows, you can see that individually this would be a food chain. But all the different food chains combined together in the ecosystem form what is called a food web. On the one over here on the right, we have a more aquatic food web, zooplankton, okay, and all the things that would eat zooplankton, and then all the things that would eat each of the individuals along the way. All you do in order to find out one food chain is to follow the arrows that would go along with each of the organisms, but all the food chains combined together in that ecosystem form what is called a food web. Lastly, we're going to discuss the concept of ecological pyramids. An ecological pyramid shows the it shows the relative amount of energy and or matter within each trophic level of an ecosystem. Within that definition, we have a couple things, other definitions we need to know. First, what is a trophic level? A trophic level is each step in a food chain or a food web. And we have three types of ecological pyramids we could study. We have an energy pyramid, we have a biomass pyramid, and we have numbers pyramid, or pyramid of numbers as it's called. We also have this term biomass. What is that? Well, you may recognize the prefix bio means living, and biomass is the total amount of living tissue within a trophic level. Pictured in your diagrams are two examples of ecological pyramids. The one on the left is an energy pyramid and shows the producers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, third level consumer, and fourth level consumer in this particular ecosystem. You note how the percentages show how much of the energy is in each of the steps along the way. Over on the right, we have a biomass and pyramid of numbers. They are often associated to be the same. Here, they show the different levels of biomass and numbers of organisms that are carried along each trophic level here as you ascend the pyramid, going from producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers, and finishing with a bear here, which would be your carnivore tertiary consumer. People would also be at the top of any energy or biomass and numbers pyramid. You've probably heard the term before, top of the food chain, for example. That'll do it for our lesson on energy levels in ecosystems. Much more in class as we apply this information in different contexts and questions.